Juan Raul Garza was born in 1956 in Brownsville, Texas. His parents had come from Mexico to work in the fields. As a child, he labored beside them in Michigan and Texas. He left high school early, but later built a small construction business. In Brownsville, people saw him as a single dad with 4 kids. He was also the son-in-law of a local pastor. But Garza was hiding something. By the late 1980s, he ran a vast smuggling network, moving soft substances from Mexico into the U.S. He grew rich, suspicious, and quick to silence anyone he suspected of talking. When a shipment was seized, he didn't hesitate. He ordered them gone. In April 1990, Garza suspected that Erasmo de la Fuente and his bodyguard, Gilberto Matos, had crossed him. He told 2 associates, Manuel and Israel Flores, to treat Matos as an example. They forced Matos into his auto body shop and shot him in the head. That act served as a warning. By September of that year, De La Fuente himself was alone in his car. Manuel Flores approached the driver's side and shot him. Israel and their brother, Jesus, helped. Then in January 1991, Garza faced a personal threat. Thomas Rumbo had hinted he might talk to authorities after a 360-pound bust. Garza went to Rumbo's place and took his life with 5 shots to the head and neck. His orders reached across the border. During his trial, prosecutors said Garza had 4 more people's lives ended in Mexico. One was his own son-in-law, Bernabe Sosa. He even arranged for a sister-in-law to be given white powder in a way meant to look like an accidental overdose. In February 1992, U.S. Customs agents searched Garza's Brownsville home. They arrested many members of his group. Garza slipped into Mexico. On November 6, 1992, authorities in Mexico caught him. He was sent back to the U.S. His federal trial began on July 7, 1993. In court, jurors saw evidence of 7,000 pounds of pot. They also heard from his nephew Emilio, who said Garza had taken Rumbo's life himself. His lawyer tried to paint him as a small-town operator, but the proof was clear. On July 29, 1993, the jury found him guilty of taking lives to protect his operation, laundering money, and running large-scale illegal substance runs. At sentencing, the jury looked at factors on both sides. They heard about the losses in Mexico. They heard about his modest home life. In the end, on August 2, 1993, they recommended he face the ultimate punishment under federal law. Garza's team filed appeals. They argued bias and errors in the process. In 2000, President Clinton paused his final action to review how the federal system treated people of different races and regions. But in June 2001, the Supreme Court and President George W. Bush refused to change the decision. His case was set at the federal prison in Terre Haute. On June 19, 2001, Garza had his last meal. He chose a steak, fries, onion rings, 3 slices of bread, and a Diet Cola. At about 7:04 a.m. Central, he was strapped to the table. In a calm voice, he spoke to the warden and the families who had lost loved ones. He said, "I'm sorry for all the pain I caused. I ask for your forgiveness. God bless." Then he received a final injection. 5 minutes later, at 7:09 a.m., he passed away. Outside the prison, just 50 people protested. There were no big media setups. Afterwards, some noted that all 6 Texans facing federal final punishment were from minority groups. Garza became the first, and so far only person sentenced under the 1988 federal law aimed at so-called kingpins. Others who faced the ultimate penalty had also been involved in trafficking, but were convicted under different laws. Garza's sentence was the only one under that specific statute. Now, how did a boy abandoned at 13 become one of Richmond's most feared gang leaders? Corey Johnson was born in 1968 in New York City. His early years were very difficult. His mother battled addiction and sometimes hurt him. When he turned 13, she left him behind. After that, he spent the next 10 years moving between foster homes, institutions, and group residences. He never learned to read or write past a basic level. His IQ was measured at 77, which is below average. By his late teens, these struggles and gaps in his education shaped who he became. By 1989, Johnson had made his way to Richmond, Virginia. There, he joined others to form the Newtown Gang. This group dealt mostly in harder substances. From the start, he showed little mercy. Between January and February 1992, he and his group set out to take over Richmond's underground market. In just 45 days, 11 people lost their lives in these clashes. Johnson was directly involved in 7 of those shootings. Sometimes he was the main shooter, Other times he helped plan or carry out the act. In one case, he entered a tavern and fatally shot rival dealer Peyton Johnson. In another, he and his accomplices fatally shot Louis Johnson, a bodyguard, in an alley. He was also found guilty of taking part in an incident that ended 3 people's lives. He shot a competitor 15 times in another incident. These actions were not sudden acts of anger. They were planned moves to protect and expand the gang's territory. In February 1993, a federal court found him guilty under laws targeting large-scale criminal enterprises that use fatal force to protect their activities. Those laws include the Continuing Criminal Enterprise Statute and RICO-based charges. He received 7 sentences to face the ultimate penalty, 1 for each count. His 2 co-defendants also faced the same penalty. Prosecutors noted that Johnson planned these acts to grow his illegal business, not in a sudden burst of rage. Johnson challenged these sentences for almost 28 years. His lawyers argued that his low IQ and painful past made the ultimate penalty unfair. They asked higher courts to review his case on these grounds. Both the Fourth Circuit and the U.S. Supreme Court refused to overturn his sentences, even though 2 justices disagreed. Some questioned whether it was right to carry out the ultimate penalty on someone with his mental capacity. Laws like Atkins versus Virginia protect people with significant intellectual disabilities from such penalties, but courts decided that Johnson still understood and planned his actions. So the penalties stood. On January 14, 2021, at age 52, his sentences were carried out at USP Terre Haute in Indiana. When asked if he had any final words, he said, "No, I'm okay." A moment later, he added, "Love you," looking at his family. He tried to wave. Once the medicine was given, his breathing slowed. Officials confirmed he had passed at 11:34 p.m. He did not offer a longer speech. After his sentences were carried out, his lawyers released a note from him. He wrote, "I want to say that I am sorry for my offenses. I want the families who suffered to hear this." He asked that the names of those who lost their lives be remembered. For his final meal, he requested pizza, jelly-filled donuts, and a strawberry milkshake. He got the pizza and milkshake, but not the donuts. In the note, he said the meal was wonderful, and added, "This should be fixed." Up next is a cook who was brought down by the woman he loved. Dustin Lee Honkin was born in 1968 in Britt, Iowa. He grew up in a troubled setting, though few details about his family are available. As a young man, he went to North Iowa Area Community College. There, he excelled in chemistry. After 1 year, he finished with top marks. He would later turn that talent to harmful ends. In the early 1990s, Honkin began selling illegal substances. Not long after, he learned how to make stronger synthetic chemicals. In 1992, he and his close friend Tim Kutkamp borrowed money from Honkin's brother. They set up a small lab in Arizona. Then they moved their work back to northeast Iowa. Honkin's careful scientific approach let him produce very pure crystal. He even sketched out plans to sell online or publish a how-to guide. Around that time, Honkin started a relationship with Angela Jane Johnson. She became the mother of his child. That bond tied her more closely to his operation. As law enforcement drew nearer, paranoia crept in. Honkin's network relied on 2 mid-level sellers, Greg Nicholson and Terry DeGias. In early 1993, Nicholson agreed to help authorities. He wore a hidden microphone and shared information after a big product seizure at his home. Honkin realized the noose was tightening. He feared more leaks. In the days before July 30th, 1993, when Honkin planned to admit his guilt, he and Johnson forced their way into Nicholson's partner's home. That partner was Lori Duncan. She lived there with her daughters, 10-year-old Candy and 6-year-old Amber. They tied up Lori and the girls. Then, in a nearby wooded area, Honkin and Johnson shot them. Lori and her partner were hit several times. The 2 girls each suffered a single shot. Later, all 4 were found hidden in swimsuits. What happened to Terry DeGias? In November 1993, he disappeared after dropping off his child. Investigators later learned he had been beaten with a bat and shot. His body lay a few miles from the Duncan site. 5 bodies remained undiscovered until 2000. Angela Johnson, hoping to shift the blame, gave jailhouse directions to another inmate. That led authorities to the remains. Because Honkin had targeted people involved in his underground work, federal law applied. Iowa had ended capital punishment in 1965, but federal courts could still issue the harshest penalties. In July 2005, after years of legal battles, Honkin faced charges that included taking lives to protect his network, tampering with witnesses, conspiracy, and illegal substance manufacturing. His trial opened in August 2004. Given his escape plans and threats toward witnesses, the court kept Honan restrained and behind a protective screen. Despite this, the jury found him guilty on all 17 counts by October 2004. During the trial, the prosecution detailed the July and November 1993 shootings. They described how 5 people, 2 children among them, were targeted solely to shield Honan's operation. The defense argued Honan's troubled upbringing and raised concerns about how some witnesses were treated. Still, the evidence was overwhelming. On October 14, 2004, the jury delivered guilty verdicts. In the penalty phase, Honan's escape plans and threats weighed heavily. On October 11, 2005, the court sentenced him to receive the final injection, a federal first for someone from Iowa since 1963. Throughout the trial, jurors faced strict rules. One juror even admitted pressure from an employer to send him away. The court removed any biased jurors to keep the process fair. Honan spent over 22 years in federal custody. In mid-July 2020, the Justice Department resumed federal injections after a 17-year pause. Despite last-minute appeals and concerns over the injection chemicals and health risks, courts denied each request. On the day his sentence was carried out, July 17, 2020, Honan had a final visit and phone calls. Just before his injection, he spoke softly, "Hail Mary, Mother of God, pray for me." In that quiet moment, the man who once used chemistry for illicit gain turned to faith as his life came to a close. Next is a man who crossed state lines to bury his victims alive and sparked one of Texas's most notorious trials. Canado Ruiz Kamacho Jr., also called Gino or Gino Kamacho, was born in 1954 in Mercedes, Texas. He grew up in South Texas in a poor neighborhood. Later on, he married and had 3 children, a daughter named Teresa and 2 sons, Canado and Marco. By the late 1980s, Kamacho had become a major cannabis trafficker in Dallas. He ran a network that worked closely with a Mexican cartel. He was feared for the way he handled anyone who owed him money, no matter how small the debt. Kamacho's operation thrived on fear. It reached a horrifying peak on May 20th, 1988. On that day, he and 2 associates broke into the home of 52-year-old Sam Wright in Pleasant Grove, Dallas. They demanded repayment of a $20,000 advance on a shipment. Inside the house were Wright's partner, Evelyn Banks, who was 31, their 3-year-old son, Andre, and David Wilburn, Wright's 25-year-old nephew, who had learning challenges. Kamacho wanted to make sure nobody would cross him again. He grabbed a revolver and shot Wilburn in the back of the head. Wilburn passed instantly. This act was meant to send a message. Wright managed to escape. But Kamacho did not stop there. He forced Evelyn and little Andre into a vehicle. He took them over the state line into Oklahoma. There, they were held in a shallow grave and left to die 3 days later. Some accounts mention a 4th person, Pamela Miller, who worked as a dancer in Dallas. It is unclear whether she was forced to help or if she witnessed too much and was silenced. After these events, Kamacho fled to Mexico. He hid in Arcelia, Guerrero, in a region controlled by the cartel. Local authorities feared that capturing him there would spark a fatal confrontation. The FBI set up a sting operation to bring him back. They lured him across the Rio Grande near McAllen, Texas. Once he stepped onto U.S. soil, agents arrested him. His trial in Dallas County became one of the most talked about cases in recent memory. Prosecutors described him as a ruthless cartel lieutenant who would take any life to maintain power. His defense team tried to challenge media coverage, jury conduct, and evidence, but they could not counter the overwhelming testimony. The judge later called the facts grotesque and bizarre. During the state trial, Kamacho also faced federal charges. He was accused of taking Evelyn and Andre across state lines and using a firearm in the process. He refused several plea offers, perhaps hoping for a lighter sentence on appeal. The Dallas jury found him guilty of capital homicide for Wilburn's case and for the fatal outcome of Evelyn and Andre's captivity. Under Texas law at the time, this verdict meant an automatic sentence to end his life. On the federal side, he was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison, but that never took effect because of the state ruling. Kamacho's appeals went through the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals and the Fifth Circuit. His lawyers argued jury errors and hidden evidence. The U.S. Supreme Court declined to review his case. His final federal appeal was denied in April 1998. On August 26, 1998, Kamacho's life was ended at the Huntsville unit in Texas. His last meal request was steak, a baked potato, salad, and strawberry ice cream. The procedure was delayed for 2 hours because technicians could not easily find suitable veins. That delay added a grim irony to a man responsible for ending multiple children's lives. Before the life-ending chemicals took effect, Kamacho spoke quietly. He said he was sorry to the families and that he regretted what had happened. He asked his attorneys to pass on his apologies to the children's families. At age 43, his sentence became the 156th carried out by that method in Texas and the 475th in the United States since capital punishment resumed in 1976. Now, how did a Florida club owner's deal gone wrong end with 4 traffickers trapped in a burning car? But before we move on to the next case, consider subscribing for more stories like this. Bernard Bolender was born in 1952 in the United States. He grew up in West Babylon, New York. He went to high school there. Public records offer little about his family. By the 1970s, he had opened a nightclub and a restaurant. He later split from his wife Joyce and their children. Around that time, he got involved in South Florida's white powder and street opiates scene. He made money fast. Some stories say he even hired a limo to drive his pet monkey. On January 8, 1980, a deal in Miami escalated. Bolender and 2 partners, Joseph Mackier and Paul Thompson, invited 4 men to meet them. The men were John Marino, Scott Bennett, Rudolfo Ayan, and Nicomedes Hernandez. The 3 hosts then forced the 4 into a car. They harmed them and took their product and cash. After that, they took 4 men's lives. To hide what happened, they set the car on fire. It was found flipped over and burning on Interstate 95. Investigators later learned that one victim, Marino, had shared information with the police. That may have led the 3 to react so harshly. Bolender's fingerprints were found on the burned car. In return for a lighter sentence, Macker agreed to tell prosecutors that Bolender had planned the acts. Bolender said he was innocent. He claimed he was at home with his girlfriend when it happened. In April 1980, Bolender went on trial. He faced 4 counts of first-degree homicide, plus charges related to unlawful confinement and armed taking of property. The jury voted unanimously for life in prison, but the judge set that aside. He said there were 8 of 9 special factors that made the case worse, and no factors to count in Bolender's favor. He imposed capital punishment. Bolender's lawyer chose not to share details about his client's past or character. Court records later said this was a deliberate choice. The idea was to move the jury quickly. In the end, it left the defense with little to counter the judge's view. Bolender appealed many times. The Florida Supreme Court reviewed his case in 1983 and kept the ruling. They removed 2 of the harsh factors but said the rest were enough. In 1987, a lower court agreed that his lawyer had not done enough and changed the penalty. That decision was reversed in 1989. A federal court also declined relief in 1990. On May 24, 1995, Florida's governor signed Bolender's 4th warrant after all appeals were used up. The jury had wanted life in prison, but state law let a judge impose a harsher penalty if the evidence was clear and convincing. The judge believed that standard was met. At 10:19 a.m. on July 18, 1995, 42-year-old Bolender faced the state's highest sanction in Florida State Prison, Rayford. He did not ask for a last meal. He offered no final words. Those who witnessed the event described him as quiet, his expression unreadable, his eyes fixed on a spot beyond the chamber walls. The process was swift and procedural. In the minutes before, guards moved with practiced calm, double-checking straps and equipment. The air in the viewing room felt heavy, tense with finality. Then the signal came, and the procedure began. Now what happens when the most feared man in Philly loses control? Cabone Savage led a major underground network in Philadelphia. He was born in 1975. He started selling cocaine in North Philadelphia in his early 20s. Between 1998 and 2004, he moved hundreds of kilograms of the product. He went to Frankfort High School. He also boxed professionally and won his only match. His father passed away when Cabone was 13. After that, he used harsh methods to rise up. He built an operation known for its fierce reputation. He had several siblings, including a sister named Cabone Savage. His mother, Barbara, defended him in court. She said he was not at fault in some cases. Cabone had at least 3 daughters and 1 son. His 9-year-old daughter, Ciara, called Cece, was shot in York, Pennsylvania on Mother's Day 2009. That event was separate from his illegal work. His longtime partner was Jasmine Vidal. Even after his harsh reputation spread, some family members still spoke for him. Savage created his network through force and fear. He gave orders, directly or through others, that led to at least 12 fatal acts between 1998 and 2004. His targets included rival dealers such as Carlton Brown in 2001 and Barry Parker in 2003. Others were Kenneth Lassiter in 1998 and Tibius Flowers in 2004. He did this to protect his business and to stop anyone who might speak against him. In October 2004, Savage was already in prison. He still ran his network from inside. He ordered a fire at a witness's family home. The witness, Eugene Coleman, had agreed to speak in court. Around 5 a.m., two men, Lamont Lewis and Robert Merritt, threw gasoline cans into the house. 6 people passed away, including Coleman's 15-month-old son and children aged 10, 12, and 15. On secret recordings, Savage joked about the victims. He was first arrested in 2004 on trafficking and racketeering charges. He received a 30-year term. His main trial began in September 2012. In May 2013, a jury found him guilty on 17 counts. These included 12 counts related to racketeering and the fatal acts. They also covered plotting to harm others in support of racketeering and witness threats that led to fatalities. The charges also dealt with illegal substances and weapons. At trial, Lamont Lewis detailed how Savage gave orders. Cabone Savage was found guilty of helping him. Co-defendants, Robert Merritt and Stephen Northington, also faced charges. Northington received a life term. Merritt also received life for his role. On May 13, 2013, the jury found him guilty on every count. In June 2013, Judge Richard Barclay Surik imposed 13 sentences carrying the maximum penalty. One count was for witness intimidation that led to fatalities. The other counts covered the fatal acts tied to racketeering. This marked the first time someone from Philadelphia received such federal penalties. His sister got life plus 10 years. Merritt and Northington each got life terms. In August 2020, a federal appeals court upheld those sentences. Savage remained at the ADX Florence facility in Colorado, where inmates facing the maximum penalty are held. On December 23, 2024, President Joe Biden changed the sentences of 37 federal inmates, including Savage. His sentences became life without any chance of early release. After that change, Savage avoided the maximum penalty. He remains at ADX Florence, where he cannot ever request release. Up next is a couple trapped in a trunk, singing hymns to the very end. Christopher Andre Valva was born in 1980 in Killeen, Texas. His mother served in the Air Force, and his father was a soldier from Trinidad. They met at Fort Benning, Georgia, and married soon after. Their marriage ended when his father faced a court-martial for harming both his wife and young Christopher. After that, Christopher's mother was cut off by her own family for marrying a black man. That left him feeling alone. Later, she formed relationships with other men who also mistreated him. He grew up unsure of where he belonged. School reports describe him as troubled and often punished, but not openly aggressive. When he was 19, Christopher joined the 212 Piru Bloods gang. On June 21, 1999, he and 4 others aged 16 to 18 spotted Todd and Stacy Bagley at a gas station near Fort Hood, Texas. They pretended to need help. Once the couple got into the car, it became a trap. Christopher showed a gun and ordered them into the trunk. For hours, the gang made Todd and Stacy give up cash at ATMs. They even tried to sell Stacy's wedding ring. All the while, the couple sang "Jesus Loves Me" and begged for mercy. Then the group drove them to a remote spot near Belton Lake. Christopher told his friends to pour lighter fluid into the car. The couple kept singing. Christopher, wearing a ski mask, opened the trunk and shot both of them in the head. After they fell silent, a companion set the trunk ablaze. When firefighters arrived, they found charred remains. The medical exam confirmed gunshot wounds and smoke inhalation. The plan began as an armed theft. They wanted money and jewelry, but it turned into forced confinement and taking of lives. Christopher took charge and made sure no one could talk later. Because it happened on a military base, federal authorities took over the case. Within a year, all 5 were arrested and brought to trial. In federal court, Christopher, then 19, and Brandon Bernard, 18, were found guilty of first-degree charges: carjacking that resulted in loss of life and helping to carry out the plan. 3 younger members, all under 18, reached plea deals. 2 admitted to second-degree charges and served about 21 years each. 1 got life, later reduced. A 15-year-old who brought the weapon served 5 years. On June 13, 2000, Christopher and Brandon received the harshest sentence. The others got long prison terms, some of which were later shortened. Christopher was sent to a high-security facility in Terre Haute, Indiana. He spent 20 years waiting for his sentence to be carried out. He shared a cell block with notorious inmates. Over the years, he spoke often with his mother. He described the fear and isolation felt by those facing their final moments. From 2002 to 2018, Christopher filed appeals, all unsuccessful. In February 2016, he used up his legal options during a pause on federal sentences. But in July 2020, the pauses ended. His sentence was set for September 24, 2020. His defense raised several points. They said his teenage brain was not fully formed. They noted he had bipolar disorder and brain damage from earlier mistreatment. They argued his lawyers had conflicts of interest. They pointed to his history of mistreatment and low maturity. They also argued the almost all-white jury was biased. Critics highlighted that he was a black man whose victims were white and that the jury included only one black member. A neuroscientist filed reports against applying such a severe sentence to someone who was a teen at the time. Emergency petitions to the Supreme Court were also denied. In the days before his sentence was carried out, Christopher did not claim he was wrongly accused. Instead, he said he had changed and found redemption. He asked for compassion, noting his age and the flaws in his trial. A video showed him in a prayer shawl and yarmulke, reflecting a new spiritual path. On September 24, 2020, at age 40, he was led into the chamber where his sentence would be carried out. He chose Pizza Hut for his final meal, a simple comfort. Before the injection, he spoke softly. "Father, heal their hearts with love. I'm ready, Father." He asked that the Bagley's family find peace. He looked at his mother through the glass. After a brief prayer, a shot of pentobarbital was given. At 6:46 p.m. Eastern, he took his final breath. Up next is a $4,700 deal that set off a chain of horror. Orlando Cordia Hall was born in 1971 in El Dorado, Arkansas. He grew up poor and in a home where aggressive behavior was common. Defense statements say he and his siblings saw harsh treatment every day. They watched their parents hurt each other. From a young age, Orlando faced instability and trauma. He struggled in school and could barely read, though he was not unintelligent. Family stories say he once saved his 3-year-old nephew from drowning. He jumped from a motel balcony and pulled the child to safety. That rare act of courage stands in sharp contrast to what he did later. By the early 1990s, he was involved in selling illegal substances. In September 1994, he ran a pot operation in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. A deal went wrong over $4,700. He believed 2 brothers in Arlington, Texas had cheated him. When he went to their apartment, only their 16-year-old sister, Lisa Renee, was there. She was an honor roll student. Hall went inside with his brother Demetrius, plus Bruce Webster, Stephen Beckley, and Marvin Holloway. They pointed a gun at Lisa and forced her into their car. She managed to call 911 and begged for help before the line went silent. They drove her to Arkansas. At a motel, they subjected her to unwanted intimate acts over several days. When Hall came back to the motel, he said, "She knows too much," and planned to end her life. That same night, they took her to a park where they had dug a hole. Hall placed a sheet over her head and hit her with a shovel. When she tried to escape, the others joined in. They beat her until she could not move. Then they doused her with gasoline, put her in the hole, and covered it. She was left without air and did not survive. Once Lisa's body was found, federal agents took over the case because it crossed state lines. In November 1994, a grand jury charged Hall and his group with taking her against her will, resulting in her passing, planning the act, moving product across state lines, extortion, and firearms violations. In February 1995, prosecutors asked for the harshest sentence. By October 1995, a jury found Hall guilty on every charge. They recommended the harshest sentence. In 1996, the judge agreed. Hall's appeals went all the way to the Supreme Court, but failed. Delays in the injection protocol paused his sentence for a while. On November 19, 2020, federal authorities resumed carrying out sentences. Hall received an injection at the United States Penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. Officials said he had passed away at 11:47 p.m. Eastern Time. Before that, he spoke about his faith and his family. He said he was okay, asked others to take care of themselves, and told them to tell his children he loved them. Even though the individuals in the next case were spared the gurney, his stories are too gripping, too tangled in unanswered questions to ignore. James H. Rohn Jr., better known as Dre Jr., was one of the key names behind a network that operated out of Richmond, Virginia. He worked closely with Corey Johnson and Richard Tipton. Together, they built what locals came to know as the Newtown Crew, a system tied to powdered product from New York, processed and moved throughout Virginia. From 1989 to mid-1992, the three managed a wide web of operations. They sourced large amounts, repackaged it locally, and handed it off to dozens of individuals who moved it through the streets. When trust was broken or territory challenged, their response was always the same: relentless, planned, and direct. Inside or outside the group, anyone seen as a problem didn't remain one for long. In the first few weeks of 1992, things escalated fast. In the span of less than a month, James Rohn's name became tied to a series of brutal and calculated acts that shook Richmond. It began on January 4th, when he helped pin down Douglas Talley while a blade was used, more than 80 times. Talley never got back up. Days later, on January 13th, another rival, Douglas Moody, was shot while trying to flee. Roan caught him in a front yard and struck with a blade 18 more times. By January 14th, Roan had armed himself and joined a group at a local tavern, where another man, Peyton Johnson, was targeted and didn't leave alive. At the end of the month, Roan drove through a tight alley to box in Ruiz Johnson, a known enforcer. He and his team opened fire until there was no movement left, and just days later, on February 1st, Roan showed up at Toric Brown's front door with 2 others. As soon as the door opened, so did the gunfire. Brown was gone in seconds. His half-sister was caught in the crossfire and seriously wounded. Each move was fast, deliberate, and meant to leave a message. Roan and his crew controlled the streets, and no one was safe from that message. In July 1992, federal agents closed in. Roan, Johnson, and Tipton were arrested and charged under a 33-count federal indictment. It included managing an illegal operation, distribution, and multiple fatal outcomes tied to it. Roan faced 15 of those counts, 3 of them directly related to Moody, Peyton Johnson, and Ruiz Johnson. The others focused on leadership and supply. At trial in Virginia, the government laid out Roan's part in each event, his actions, the planning, and the aftermath. The jury agreed on every count. In February 1993, Roan received the maximum penalty for one of the incidents. For the other 2, he was sentenced to life, along with extended terms for his role in the overall network. Johnson and Tipton received matching outcomes. Roan later appealed, saying his lawyer had mishandled part of his defense. In 2004, one conviction was overturned, but the others stayed. He's still in federal custody today. Over the years, he's filed multiple motions to reduce or change his sentence. All of them were denied. Most recently, in March 2024, the Fourth Circuit ruled that his case didn't qualify for reconsideration. The next man's empire collapsed after one raid. The fallout changed history. Rafael was born in 1952 in La Noria, Badiraguato, Sinaloa. He was the oldest of 12 children. His parents were Emilio Caro Payan and Hermelinda Quintero. When Rafael was 14, his father passed away. As the eldest son, he took on the responsibility of caring for his siblings. He worked on cattle ranches and helped on farms. In time, he discovered that growing pot could bring in more money. A trafficker named Pedro Aviles Perez introduced him to that business. Rafael expanded from small plots to multi-hectare fields under the Guadalajara cartel. His brother Miguel later formed the Sonora cartel. In their family, illegal substance trade was a common path. By the late 1970s, Rafael joined forces with Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, and Pedro Aviles Perez. Together, they set up the Guadalajara cartel. Rafael was among the first to grow seedless pot, known as sinsemilla. This type was stronger and easier to smuggle. He oversaw large growing sites across Sinaloa and Chihuahua. He arranged huge shipments into the United States. By early 1985, tensions were high. A U.S. agent named Enrique Kiki Camarena led a raid that destroyed Rafael's largest ranch in Chihuahua. Rafael believed Camarena was responsible. He feared losing his operations and being exposed. He ordered a harsh response. In February 1985, Rafael's men took Camarena and 3 others against their will. They also seized pilot Alfredo Zavala Avelar, American John Clay Walker, and Mexican student Alberto Radalat. Camarena was held and subjected to brutal treatment for about 30 hours. Recordings from that time show how severe it was. All 4 men later lost their lives. About a month afterward, Camarena's body was found at a remote ranch. After that, Rafael fled to Costa Rica. In April 1985, authorities there captured him. He was sent back to Mexico and given a 40-year prison term for his role in the fatal incident. Even behind bars, his influence continued. His associates split the old cartel into new groups based in Tijuana, Sinaloa, and Juarez. In 2013, after serving 28 years, a court ruled his trial had serious errors. The court ordered his release. Rafael vanished immediately and became a fugitive. The FBI added him to their 10 most wanted list with a $20 million reward. He remained at large until July 2022, when Mexican police arrested him again. On February 27, 2025, Mexico handed him over to U.S. authorities as part of a larger transfer of several cartel figures. He appeared in a Brooklyn courtroom facing new charges. These included leading a criminal organization, plotting large-scale shipments, conspiring in fatal harm, and illegal firearms possession. He pleaded not guilty. He wore the same handcuffs once used on Camarena, a stark reminder of what happened. His defense highlighted several issues. First, decades had passed since the 1985 events. Second, he had been released in 2013 after a flawed trial. Third, his return to U.S. custody came through an unusual procedure, not a formal treaty. Prosecutors are seeking the harshest penalty. They argue he planned the fatal harm of a law enforcement agent. This case still resonates deeply with the U.S. agency involved. In recent hearings, prosecutors played disturbing recordings from Camarines holding. They said a final decision on penalty review will come by September 18, 2025. As of now, the court has not reached a verdict. Rafael remains in custody with no option for bail. He is 72 years old. If the jury finds him guilty, he could face the highest punishment allowed under U.S. law.